I have always loved cooking. Growing up in our cozy house in Denver, I spent countless hours in the kitchen experimenting with flavors and creating meals that brought my family together. My name is Alyssa, and at 22, I am a culinary arts student who genuinely believes food is a love language. My younger sister Madison always complimented my cooking, and I loved sharing my creations with her. But what happened last Tuesday made me realize accidents do not happen 5 times a week. Before I tell you about my sister's innocent mistakes and how I finally gave her a taste of her own medicine, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button if you have ever had a sneaky sibling who somehow always found their way to your food. And do not forget to subscribe because trust me, you will want to hear how this food battle ended with the most satisfying revenge I have ever pulled off. Have you ever caught someone red-handed doing something they claimed was an accident? Share your stories, because after today you will understand exactly how I felt when I discovered the truth about Madison's late-night kitchen visits. Now let me take you back to where this whole mess started, and why I decided my sweet little sister needed a very spicy lesson in respect. Living with my family in the suburbs of Denver has always been pretty peaceful. My mom Linda works as a nurse at the local hospital, and my dad Robert handles accounting for a small business downtown. We are your typical middle-class American family, and I have been the designated cook since I turned 16 and discovered my passion for creating delicious meals. Madison, my 19-year-old sister, studies business at the community college and has this outgoing, bubbly personality that everyone adores. She can charm her way out of any situation with those big brown eyes and her innocent smile. Our relationship had always been solid. She would brag to her friends about having a sister who could cook like a professional chef, and I loved making her favorite dishes whenever she had a rough day at school. Madison would always hang around the kitchen while I cooked, asking questions about ingredients and techniques. I thought she genuinely appreciated the effort I put into every meal, and I felt proud knowing I could make her happy with my cooking skills. Everything changed on a Monday 2 weeks ago. I had spent the previous evening making a gorgeous individual lasagna with layers of homemade pasta ricotta, mixed with fresh herbs, and a meat sauce that had simmered for hours. This was not just any dinner leftover. I had specifically made this portion for my lunch the next day between my morning classes. I wrote my name clearly on the container with a black marker and placed it prominently on the second shelf of our refrigerator where everyone could see the label. Tuesday morning arrived, and I rushed through my usual routine of showering, getting dressed, and grabbing my textbooks. I had 3 back-to-back classes, and I was genuinely excited about enjoying my carefully crafted lasagna during my break. When I returned home around 2 in the afternoon, exhausted and hungry, I opened the refrigerator expecting to find my delicious meal waiting for me. The container was gone. I searched every shelf thinking maybe someone had moved it. Nothing. I checked the dishwasher, wondering if maybe my parents had eaten it and washed the container. Empty. Finally, I found Madison in her room, typing away on her laptop with textbooks scattered across her bed. When I asked about my missing lasagna, she looked up with the most genuinely surprised expression I had ever seen. She immediately started apologizing, explaining how she had woken up late for her 9 a.m. business ethics class and grabbed what she thought was leftover food our mom had made available for everyone. Madison claimed she had been in such a rush that she did not notice my name on the container until she was already halfway through eating it at school. She seemed so sincere, so apologetic, that I felt bad for even questioning her about it. Madison offered to buy me pizza to make up for the mistake, but I told her not to worry about it. Accidents happen, right? She promised to be more careful in the future and pay better attention before taking anything from the refrigerator. I believed her completely. After all, she was my sister, and why would she lie about something so small? I brushed off the incident and decided to make myself a simple sandwich instead. The second incident occurred that Thursday. I had planned a special dinner date with my boyfriend Tyler, and I wanted to impress him with my homemade chicken Alfredo pasta. I spent the entire afternoon preparing the sauce from scratch, using real Parmesan cheese and heavy cream, and I had even made fresh fettuccine noodles by hand. This meal was not just food, it was my way of showing Tyler how much I cared about him and our relationship. I prepared 2 generous portions and stored them in clearly marked containers. This time I went the extra mile and wrote a detailed note in big bold letters that said, "For Alyssa's date night with Tyler, do not touch. Serious." I even drew little hearts around the message to make it clear this was something special and important to me. Tyler was supposed to pick me up at 7, and we planned to have dinner at my place before going to see a movie. At 6:30, I went to the kitchen to warm up our meal, and my heart sank when I opened the refrigerator. One of the containers was completely empty, and the other contained maybe half a portion. Madison had struck again. I found her in the living room watching television with a content expression on her face. When I confronted her about the pasta, she immediately launched into another elaborate explanation about being overwhelmed with studying for her economics midterm. She claimed she had been so focused on memorizing formulas that she grabbed food without thinking, and by the time she realized her mistake, she had already eaten most of it. Madison insisted she was literally dying of hunger after studying for 6 straight hours and just needed something quick to keep her energy up. Once again, she seemed genuinely remorseful. She kept repeating how sorry she was and how she would definitely be more careful in the future. I wanted to believe her, but a tiny seed of doubt started growing in my mind. How could someone accidentally ignore such a clear, detailed note? Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Tyler and I ended up ordering Chinese takeout instead, and while he was understanding about the situation, I felt embarrassed explaining why our romantic home-cooked dinner had been derailed by my careless sister. The third incident happened that Saturday, and this one really tested my patience. I had volunteered to bring dessert to my friend Sarah's potluck party, and I decided to make my signature strawberry cheesecake. This recipe was special to me because it had been passed down from my grandmother, and it required a lot of time and expensive ingredients to make properly. I woke up at 5 in the morning to start the process, carefully preparing the graham cracker crust, making the smooth cream cheese filling, and arranging fresh strawberries on top in a beautiful pattern. The cheesecake needed to chill for at least 6 hours to set properly, so I placed it in the refrigerator with a note that read, "For Sarah's potluck party. Hands off, Alyssa." I was so proud of how gorgeous it looked, and I knew my friends would be impressed with my baking skills. When I went to retrieve the cheesecake before the party, I discovered that 3 substantial pieces had been carefully cut out and eaten. Madison had left the rest of the dessert intact, but those missing slices created obvious gaps that made the whole thing look incomplete and unpresentable. I was mortified at the thought of showing up to the party with a partially eaten dessert. Madison was in her room getting ready to go out with her own friends when I confronted her. This time, her excuse was that she needed to do some quality control taste testing to make sure the cheesecake was good enough for my friends. She claimed she only intended to take a tiny bite from one slice, but it was so delicious that she could not stop herself from having a little more. She made it sound like her lack of self-control was actually a compliment to my baking abilities. I ended up going to Sarah's party empty-handed, which was incredibly embarrassing. When people asked about the dessert I had promised to bring, I had to make up some story about ingredients going bad at the last minute. The whole situation made me feel unreliable and irresponsible, even though the problem was entirely Madison's fault. By this point, I was starting to seriously doubt whether these were really accidents. 3 times in 2 weeks seemed like more than just carelessness or absent-mindedness. But when I tried to talk to Tyler about my suspicions, he suggested that maybe Madison was just going through a stressful time with school and genuinely not paying attention to what she was doing. He encouraged me to be patient and understanding, reminding me that siblings sometimes go through phases where they act inconsiderately without meaning any real harm. The fourth incident was the breaking point that transformed my growing suspicion into absolute certainty about Madison's true intentions. Tyler's birthday was coming up on Monday, and I wanted to create something truly spectacular to show him how much he meant to me. I decided to make an elaborate 3-layer chocolate cake with homemade raspberry filling and silky chocolate ganache frosting. This was not just any dessert. It was going to be a masterpiece that would demonstrate all the advanced techniques I had learned in my culinary program. I spent the entire Sunday afternoon working on this cake. First, I made the chocolate sponge layers from scratch, carefully measuring each ingredient and folding the batter with precision to achieve the perfect texture. While the layers were baking and cooling, I prepared the raspberry filling by cooking down fresh berries with sugar until they reached the ideal consistency. The ganache required me to heat heavy cream to exactly the right temperature before slowly incorporating premium dark chocolate to create that glossy, smooth finish that would make the cake look professionally made. After 4 hours of intensive work, I had created what was honestly the most beautiful cake I had ever made. The layers were perfectly even. The raspberry filling added the perfect tart contrast to the rich chocolate, and the ganache had set into a flawless mirror-like surface. I was so proud of this creation that I took several photos before carefully placing it in the refrigerator. This time, I was not taking any chances. I wrote a detailed note explaining that this was Tyler's birthday cake and attached it directly to the cake box. I also sent Madison a text message that evening specifically asking her not to touch anything in the refrigerator because I had made something special for Tyler's birthday. She responded with a simple, "Okay," and a heart emoji, which made me feel confident that she understood how important this was to me. Monday morning arrived, and I was excited to surprise Tyler with his birthday cake when he came over after his classes. But when I opened the refrigerator, my heart absolutely shattered. Someone had cut out a substantial corner piece of the cake, completely destroying the perfect appearance I had worked so hard to achieve. The missing section was large enough that there was no way to hide it or disguise the damage. I found Madison in the kitchen calmly eating cereal and scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. When I asked her about the cake, she put on that same innocent expression I was becoming far too familiar with. This time her excuse was that she had been stress eating because of her upcoming economics exam, and she only meant to take the tiniest bite to taste my work. According to her story, the cake was so incredibly delicious that she lost control and accidentally ate more than she intended. What made this situation even worse was that Tyler arrived just 20 minutes later to pick me up for his birthday lunch. When he saw the damaged cake, I had to explain the embarrassing situation of my sister's accidental food consumption. Tyler was not upset about the cake itself, but I could tell he was bothered by the fact that I was constantly being disrespected in my own home. He gently suggested that maybe it was time for me to have a serious conversation with my parents about establishing better boundaries with Madison. That evening, I finally decided to approach my parents about Madison's pattern of accidentally eating my food. I sat them down in the living room and carefully explained the 4 incidents that had occurred over the past 2 weeks. I tried to present the information objectively, without sounding accusatory or dramatic, but I wanted them to understand that this was becoming a real problem that was affecting my relationships and my confidence in my own home. My mom's response was disappointing, but not entirely surprising. She immediately jumped to Madison's defense, explaining that my sister had always been absent-minded when she was stressed about school. Mom suggested that Madison probably was not paying attention to what she was eating because she was so focused on her studies. She encouraged me to be more understanding and patient, reminding me that we are family, and family members should be willing to share with each other. My dad's response was even more frustrating. He suggested that if I wanted to keep food for myself, I should simply make extra portions so there would be enough for everyone. He seemed to think the solution was for me to accommodate Madison's behavior rather than addressing the behavior itself. Both of my parents kept emphasizing how much stress Madison was under with her college coursework, and they made it clear they expected me to be the more mature and understanding older sister. Madison was present during this conversation, and she put on the most convincing performance of remorse I had ever witnessed. She apologized profusely, promising that she would be much more careful in the future and would always ask permission before eating anything that might belong to someone else. She even teared up a little bit, claiming that she felt terrible about causing me distress and that she never intended to hurt my feelings or disrespect my hard work. Despite her convincing act, I was beginning to notice little inconsistencies in her stories and behavior that made me question whether these were really accidents. But with my parents firmly on her side and no concrete proof of intentional wrongdoing, I felt trapped and invalidated. It seemed like everyone expected me to just accept this situation and find ways to work around my sister's carelessness. The breakthrough moment came on Thursday, when I decided to conduct a little experiment that would either confirm my suspicions or prove that I was being paranoid and unfair to Madison. I announced to the family that I was making lemon bars for my study group, which was meeting at our house on Friday afternoon. I deliberately made 2 separate batches, one normal batch, with the proper amount of sugar and lemon juice, and one batch that I loaded with an excessive amount of salt instead of sugar, making them completely inedible. I carefully labeled both batches with identical signs that said, "For Friday Study Group," but I hid the normal batch in a less obvious location in the pantry, while leaving the salty batch prominently displayed in the refrigerator, where Madison would easily find them. If she was really just accidentally grabbing food without paying attention, she would logically take from the most visible batch. But if she was deliberately seeking out the best food available, she would find the hidden good batch. My dad had recently installed a small security camera in the kitchen after we had some issues with a contractor, and I realized I could use this to monitor what actually happened when Madison thought no one was watching. I positioned myself where I could observe the camera feed from my laptop and waited to see how this test would play out. The results were absolutely shocking and confirmed every suspicion I had been developing. Thursday evening, while my parents were watching television in the living room, and I was supposedly in my room studying, I watched Madison enter the kitchen and approach the refrigerator. She clearly read the note on the visible batch of lemon bars, but instead of taking from that container, she spent several minutes searching through the kitchen until she found the hidden batch of normal lemon bars in the pantry. Madison carefully selected 3 pieces from the good batch, then returned to her room to enjoy her stolen treats. This was not absent-minded accident or careless mistake. This was calculated, deliberate theft. She had known exactly what she was doing every single time, and she had been manipulating all of us with her innocent act and creative excuses. Armed with this undeniable evidence, I confronted Madison the next morning. I showed her the camera footage and asked her to explain how someone could accidentally find and eat from a hidden container while ignoring the clearly labeled container that was right in front of her face. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Madison could not come up with a convincing excuse or innocent explanation. When she realized that her elaborate deception had been exposed, Madison's sweet, apologetic demeanor completely disappeared. She became defensive and angry, asking me what the big deal was and why I was being so dramatic over some stupid food. She argued that I made so much food anyway, and as her sister I should be willing to share without making such a fuss about it. Madison claimed that I was being selfish and unreasonable, and she accused me of setting a trap just to make her look bad. This conversation revealed the truth about Madison's attitude and intentions. She had never felt guilty about taking my food, and she had never had any intention of stopping. The only thing she regretted was getting caught. All those convincing apologies and promises to be more careful had been complete lies, designed to manipulate me and our parents into letting her continue this disrespectful behavior. After discovering Madison's true intentions, I realized that talking to her or appealing to our parents was not going to solve this problem. Madison had proven that she felt entitled to take whatever she wanted whenever she wanted it, and she had no respect for my time, effort, or feelings. If I wanted this behavior to stop, I was going to have to take matters into my own hands and teach her a lesson she would never forget. I spent the weekend researching harmless food pranks online, looking for ideas that would be unpleasant enough to deter future theft, but not dangerous enough to cause any real harm. After reading through dozens of forums and prank websites, I found the perfect solution: ghost pepper chocolate cake. This would be a beautiful, tempting dessert that looked completely innocent from the outside, but would deliver an unforgettable surprise to anyone who took an unauthorized bite. Ghost peppers are among the hottest peppers in the world, measuring over 1 million units on the Scoville heat scale. When used in very small amounts, they can add intense heat to food without causing any permanent damage. The key was to incorporate just enough ghost pepper powder into the chocolate batter to create a seriously unpleasant experience while ensuring the heat would not be immediately obvious from the appearance or smell of the finished cake. I shared my plan with Tyler, and he was absolutely thrilled about the idea. He had been watching Madison disrespect me for weeks, and he was excited to see her finally face some consequences for her selfish behavior. Tyler offered to let me use his apartment kitchen to prepare the special cake, which would allow me to work without any risk of Madison discovering what I was doing or accidentally eating the wrong batch. Saturday afternoon, I told my family I was going to spend the day hanging out with friends, but I actually went to Tyler's place to begin my careful preparation. I started by making a completely normal chocolate cake that would serve as the control group. This legitimate cake would be for my family to enjoy, ensuring that my parents would not accidentally consume the spicy version, and also providing me with plausible cover for my baking activities. The ghost pepper cake required much more delicate handling. I wore gloves while measuring the pepper powder and made sure to work in a well-ventilated area. The amount of ghost pepper needed was surprisingly small. Just a quarter teaspoon was enough to infuse an entire cake with serious heat. I mixed the pepper powder directly into the cocoa powder before incorporating it into the batter, which helped distribute the heat evenly throughout the cake while masking any visual changes to the chocolate color. Both cakes baked beautifully, and from the outside they looked completely identical. I prepared matching chocolate buttercream frosting for both, making sure the spicy cake had extra thick frosting to help mask any potential pepper smell. The finished products were gorgeous chocolate layer cakes that would tempt anyone with a sweet tooth. The final step was creating the perfect bait. I needed Madison to believe this cake was something special and valuable, something worth stealing. I decided to tell my family that this was a practice cake for my culinary final exam, and that I needed to present it to my professor for feedback before submitting my final project. This backstory would make the cake seem important and off-limits, which would make it irresistible to Madison's entitled mindset. Sunday evening, I returned home with both cakes and immediately began setting up my trap. I placed the ghost pepper cake in the most prominent location in the refrigerator, right where Madison always looked for food to steal. I attached a note that said, "Practice cake for culinary final. Please do not touch until I get feedback from professor." This message was designed to make the cake seem both valuable and forbidden, two qualities that had proven irresistible to Madison in the past. I made sure my parents witnessed me bringing home the practice cake and heard my explanation about needing professor feedback. Both Mom and Dad acknowledged the importance of my school project and promised not to touch the cake until I received the professional evaluation I needed. Madison was in her room during this conversation, but I knew she was listening to every word through her thin bedroom wall. The legitimate chocolate cake went into a different container with a note saying, "Family dessert. Enjoy," and I made sure everyone knew this was available for anyone who wanted a sweet treat. This provided Madison with a perfectly acceptable option if she genuinely wanted chocolate cake, which meant that any decision to eat from the forbidden practice cake would be purely motivated by her desire to take what was not meant for her. Monday morning arrived, and I put my plan into action. I made a big show of leaving early for school, grabbing my backpack and keys, while mentioning to Mom that I had back-to-back classes until noon. But instead of going to campus, I parked my car around the corner and quietly entered our house through the back door. I positioned myself in the garage, where I had a clear view of the kitchen through a window, but could not be seen from inside the house. At exactly 9 a.m., just as I had predicted, Madison appeared in the kitchen, wearing her pajamas and carrying her coffee mug. I watched as she opened the refrigerator and immediately spotted the forbidden practice cake. She looked around carefully to make sure no one else was in the house, then pulled out the cake container and placed it on the kitchen counter. Madison took her time reading the note I had attached, clearly understanding that this cake was off limits and meant for my school project. But instead of respecting those boundaries, she opened the container and cut herself a generous slice. This was not a tiny taste or a small bite. She cut a piece that was easily 1/8 of the entire cake. Madison plated her stolen slice and settled down at the kitchen table, with a satisfied smile, clearly pleased with herself for finding such a delicious forbidden treat. I watched as she took her first confident bite, chewing slowly and savoring what she expected to be another example of my excellent baking skills. For about 10 seconds, Madison continued eating with obvious enjoyment, completely unaware of what was coming. Then, as the ghost pepper heat began to build in her mouth, her expression started to change from pleasure to confusion to absolute panic. Madison's eyes began watering, her face turned bright red, and she started frantically looking around the kitchen for something to drink. She ran to the sink and began gulping water directly from the faucet, but anyone who knows about spicy food understands that water only makes the heat worse. She grabbed milk from the refrigerator and drank directly from the carton, then moved on to yogurt, ice cream, and anything else she could find that might provide relief. This was the perfect moment for my grand entrance. I calmly walked into the kitchen, acting surprised to see Madison home during what should have been her class time. I innocently asked how her morning was going and whether everything was okay, since she appeared to be having some kind of emergency in the kitchen. Madison could barely speak through her tears and the burning sensation in her mouth. When she finally managed to ask what was in the cake, I explained very calmly that I had used ghost peppers in my practice recipe as an experiment in flavor combinations. I told her that now she knew exactly how it felt to take something that was not meant for her, and that maybe this experience would help her understand why her weeks of food theft had been so hurtful and disrespectful. Madison's reaction to my ghost pepper surprise was even more dramatic than I had anticipated. She spent nearly 30 minutes trying different remedies to cool the burning sensation in her mouth, progressing from water to milk to ice cream, to finally calling Tyler to ask if he knew any effective ways to neutralize pepper heat. The panic in her voice was obvious, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like justice was finally being served. When Madison could finally speak clearly again, she was absolutely furious with me. She accused me of poisoning her and claimed that what I had done was dangerous and potentially illegal. Madison demanded to know what would have happened if she had been allergic to peppers or if the heat had been strong enough to send her to the hospital. She was angry, embarrassed, and clearly shocked that her sweet older sister had been capable of such calculated revenge. I remained completely calm during her tirade, explaining that ghost peppers are used in cooking all around the world and that the amount I had used was well within safe limits. I pointed out that she had experienced exactly what she deserved for stealing food that was clearly marked as off limits, and that this unpleasant experience was still far more temporary than the weeks of frustration and disrespect she had put me through. Madison tried to turn the situation around by claiming that I should have warned her about the spicy ingredients, but I reminded her that she was not supposed to be eating the cake at all. If she had respected the clear note I had left or chosen to eat from the family dessert I had provided, she never would have encountered any ghost peppers. The only reason she was suffering was because she had deliberately chosen to steal something that did not belong to her. The commotion in the kitchen woke up our parents, who came downstairs expecting to find a normal Monday morning scene, but instead discovered Madison in tears and me standing there with a satisfied expression on my face. Madison immediately tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I had set a dangerous trap and deliberately hurt her with poisoned food. However, I was prepared for this moment. I calmly presented my parents with all the evidence I had gathered about Madison's pattern of food theft, including the security camera footage that clearly showed her deliberately seeking out hidden food rather than eating from the containers that were obviously available. I explained how I had discovered that Madison's accidents were actually calculated theft, and how her promises to be more careful had been outright lies. My parents were absolutely shocked to see the camera footage of Madison carefully searching for the best food while ignoring what was readily available. Dad was particularly disappointed since he had always prided himself on raising honest, respectful children. Mom was forced to confront the fact that she had been enabling Madison's bad behavior by consistently making excuses for her and expecting me to accommodate her selfishness. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Madison was forced to admit the truth about her actions. With undeniable video evidence staring her in the face and her latest theft attempt having backfired so spectacularly, she could no longer maintain her innocent act. Madison finally confessed that she had been deliberately taking my food because she thought it was better than what was normally available, and she had assumed I would just keep making more without ever standing up to her. My parents immediately apologized to me for not believing my concerns and for failing to address Madison's disrespectful behavior when I first brought it to their attention. They realized that their desire to keep peace in the family had actually enabled Madison to continue hurting me, and they felt terrible about the weeks of frustration I had endured while being told I was overreacting to legitimate theft. Madison was grounded for 2 weeks and required to pay back the cost of all the ingredients she had stolen from me over the past month. More importantly, my parents established new household rules about respecting other people's clearly marked food and consequences for anyone who violated those boundaries. Madison was also required to write a formal letter of apology, acknowledging her behavior and explaining how she planned to rebuild trust in our family. The next few days were tense, with Madison clearly resentful about facing real consequences for the first time in this whole situation. She was angry with me for outsmarting her, embarrassed about being caught in such elaborate lies, and frustrated that her charm and manipulation tactics had finally stopped working. Madison barely spoke to me for the rest of the week, communicating only when absolutely necessary and maintaining an attitude of injured pride. But something interesting happened when Tyler came over for dinner that Friday. During casual conversation, he happened to mention how upset I had been after the birthday cake incident, and how he had never seen me cry over anything food-related before that day. Tyler explained that he had been worried about me because it was so unlike me to get emotional about cooking, which was usually my greatest source of joy and confidence. This comment seemed to genuinely impact Madison in a way that my confrontations and our parents' punishments had not. For the first time, she was hearing about the emotional cost of her actions from a neutral third party who had no reason to exaggerate or manipulate the situation. Tyler's honest observation about my tears and frustration helped Madison understand that her food theft had not just been an inconvenience, it had actually been deeply hurtful to someone she claimed to love. Over the next week, I noticed Madison starting to pay more attention to the effort I put into my cooking. She began watching me work in the kitchen with what seemed like genuine curiosity, rather than just calculating what she might want to steal later. Madison started asking questions about techniques and ingredients, and she seemed genuinely interested in learning about the time and skill required to create the meals she had been casually taking. One evening, Madison approached me while I was preparing dinner and offered to help with the preparation. She admitted that she had never really thought about how much work went into the food she had been stealing, and that seeing me spend hours on elaborate dishes had given her a new appreciation for culinary skills. Madison asked if I would be willing to teach her some basic cooking techniques so she could start making her own special meals instead of taking mine. This request surprised me because it was the first time Madison had shown any interest in actually working for something she wanted rather than just taking it from someone else. I agreed to give her some cooking lessons, partly because I was curious to see whether her interest was genuine, and partly because I thought it might help her develop more respect for the effort involved in food preparation. 6 months have passed since the ghost pepper incident, and the change in Madison's behavior has been remarkable. She not only respects my clearly marked food, but she has become genuinely helpful in the kitchen. Madison now volunteers to help with grocery shopping, meal planning, and food preparation. She measures every ingredient carefully and always asks permission before tasting anything, even when I offer her samples. Our Sunday family dinners have become collaborative efforts, with Madison serving as my sous chef and learning new techniques each week. She has developed her own specialties and takes pride in contributing her own dishes to our family meals. Madison has also started bringing her own homemade treats to share with friends, instead of relying on my baking to impress people. Most importantly, Madison's entitled attitude about taking things that do not belong to her has completely disappeared. She has learned to appreciate the work that goes into creating something special, and she now understands that respecting other people's boundaries is essential for maintaining trust and healthy relationships. The lesson she learned from that ghost pepper cake extended far beyond just food. It taught her about consequences, respect, and the importance of considering how her actions affect other people. Looking back, that ghost pepper cake taught us both something important about boundaries and consequences. Sometimes people need to experience the results of their actions in a very direct way before they can truly understand the impact they have been having on others. I learned that being patient and forgiving does not mean allowing myself to be a doormat, and that standing up for myself was not only acceptable but necessary for maintaining my self-respect and healthy family relationships. Madison learned that taking something small from someone you love can actually damage something much bigger: trust, respect, and the foundation of your relationship. She discovered that entitled behavior and manipulation might work temporarily, but they ultimately hurt everyone involved and prevent genuine connection and growth. Now, 6 months later, Madison has become my most reliable kitchen assistant and my most enthusiastic taste tester. She measures every ingredient with precision, asks permission before sampling anything, and genuinely appreciates the effort that goes into creating special meals. It is funny how a little heat can change everything, is it not? Sometimes the best revenge is not about getting even. It is about teaching someone to become a better person. Have you ever had to teach someone a lesson about respecting boundaries? What is the most creative way you have ever dealt with someone who kept taking advantage of your kindness? Share your stories in the comments below, because I would love to hear how you handled similar situations. If this story reminded you of your own sneaky siblings or food thieves, please hit that like button and let me know I am not the only one who has dealt with mysterious disappearing meals. Do not forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, creative solutions, and the lessons we learn when we finally decide to stand up for ourselves. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that sometimes the sweetest revenge comes with a side of very spicy justice. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminded you that it is always okay to defend your boundaries, even if it means adding a little heat to the situation. Until next time, keep cooking with love, but do not be afraid to add some spice when people need to learn respect.